the aftermath of the COVID-19, the new social impact ecosystem. The series was launched in April. The aim was discussing concepts that are currently not mainstream and may, or perhaps should, become mainstream in the aftermath of COVID-19. Today is the 11th session, and it's a great pleasure to have with us Dr. Ayman El Tarabishy, Deputy Chair and Teaching Professor, George Washington University, and he will talk to us about a very timely topic, the end of the status quo. Let me introduce Dr. Ayman. Ayman is currently the Deputy Chair and Teaching Professor, Department of Management, George Washington University in DC, Washington, DC, School of Business. He's recognized by the UN and the Permanent Mission of Argentina to the United Nations. He actually, interesting, he worked on having a day, UN Day for the small and medium size enterprises, June 27th. He's featured a United States expert on small businesses, BBC Business Matters report. He's an award-winning author, teacher. In 2019, a new venture competition, he was awarded the most influential faculty. He's the only faculty member in George Washington School of Business to teach two nationally ranked programs. He developed the first social entrepreneurship, innovation, and creativity courses offered at the MBA and undergraduate level. He also sits as Executive Director of the International Council for Small Businesses, ICSB. And in his capacity, he works to uphold standards and initiatives of the oldest and largest nonprofit organization across the globe. ICSB promotes the advancement of small business research and practices. And this will be the core, the small micro businesses. This is going to be the core of the talk today. Now, the logistics, Ayman is going to talk for 25 to 30 minutes. Then we're going to have a round of questions. If you have any questions, you need to submit it on the chat box. And in the end, we'll have a wrap-up. Thank you. Ayman, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ali, and greetings from Washington, D.C. I want to thank you for hosting me. I want to thank the Gerhard Center for hosting me. Can you all hear me clearly? Am I clear? Is it good? The audio is good? Okay, perfect. And I also would like to first, let me thank the Gerhard Center at the American University of Cairo for inviting me to speak. I would like to personally thank Dr. Ali for the invitation, for the kind invitation. I would like to also thank Amal Mawafi for introducing us and proposing it. And I also would like to send a warm thank you to Dr. Dean Sharif Kamel and all the faculty at AUC. We know each other now for a long time, so I'm sending him personal greetings here. And I also like to thank Kamran and Iman for helping with the logistics and the organization. Thank you very much. It's greatly appreciated here. So I am half Egyptian, half Italian. So my dad is Egyptian and my mom is Italian. So I am just extremely delighted and happy to do a webinar for AUC in Egypt. I feel like I'm going home. You know what I mean? So even though I'm in Washington, D.C., when I do this, I just get excited here. And I think I talked enough to all my friends that I'm doing this webinar, and I see some of them here joining me. So this feels like home. And I've been to AUC and multiple campuses, many times on campus. So I think Dr. Sharif Sheita also once invited me to campus, and I lectured on the AUC campus here. So I'm just delighted to come back here. AUC is like home, away from home for me when I come back. And finally, I also want to thank AUC and Ayman Ismail in particular for being the sponsor for our conference last year for the Student Academy, the ICSB Student Academy, in which we had ICSB students attending AUC campus and staying in the dormitories. That was very gracious and kind of him. So I want to recognize Dr. Ayman Ismail for that as well. So saying this, let's get started. I have a very exciting presentation to show you, and maybe something, a little bit cutting edge, kind of on the fringes of thought here, and maybe to get you guys kind of to think differently here a little bit. So let me share my screen, and hopefully everything works properly here. So let me go here. Let me go here, and then let me pull up this and go here. And let me make sure I can make it into presentation mode. 1 second. Do you all see the screen clearly? Let's just give it a minute. Okay, so we're all good to go. Audio and video is good to go. Okay, so so let me start with the end, the title of it, the end of the status quo, right? And in Arabic, معناها النهاية زي ما نعرفها, right? I'm speaking a little bit Arabic and Egyptian here, just for my colleagues in Egypt, just so you know that I said I spoke a little bit of Egyptian here. So the end of the status quo, and I'll tell you the story behind the title of it, and then you'll understand where this came from. So ICSB and the International Council for Small Business, where I am the executive director, about 3 years ago, we decided that every December, we will launch the top 10 trends for the new year. So in 2017, we started what we call the top 10 trends for 2018. And in December of 2018, we wrote the top 10 trends for 2019. And then for 2019, we wrote the top 10 trends for 2020. And the idea here is because of all our different events and activities and conferences and papers and research, I get to get access to many different thought leaders from around the world. So I will talk, for example, I talked to Amal from the ILO when she used to be with the ILO and now with the AUC. I would talk to people from the UN. I would talk to people, I would go to Cairo and meet with people at universities and colleges. And I would go and do a conference in Italy. And I would go around the world and listen to people tell me different things. And at the end of the year, I bring the thought leaders of ICSB, President Ahmed Osman, I bring a lot of other people, and we sit in a room, literally, and talk about what we think the future might be like. What do we think the trends for the next year will be like? And this goes on about a month. We go back and forth with different thought leaders about what do we think the trends are going to be. And believe it or not, in December of 2019, we came with basically top 3. And I'm going to mention the number 2, and then I'll mention the number 1. The second trend that we thought that will be very big in 2020 was the rise of the entrepreneurial city. We said cities, not countries, will play a major role in entrepreneurship and small business. So cities like Cairo, cities like Rome, cities like New York, cities like Los Angeles are going to take a different role, right, in leading the world in terms of entrepreneurship. And as we saw, cities have played a big role this year in many different aspects. So that was number 2. But number 1, and we said with the end of the decade, so now we're starting 2020, we thought things are going to change in a new decade. We said the new decade will bring in a lot of changes. Right? We see it happening, we feel it happening. And that was in December, basically. While we're discussing this, we basically wrote the top 1 trend, the number 1 trend for 2020 for ICSB. We called it the end of the status quo, right? And we said the new decade will usher in a new world, new sirens, new voices will come in. And then COVID-19 happens. And then the world stops in February and March. So then I get Ahmed Osman, I get Winslow Sargent, I get people from around the world calling me and telling me, Ayman, did you really mean the world is going to end? And I was like, no, it's the end of the status quo. It doesn't mean the world is going to end. And then they told me, why so negative, ya Ayman? You changed the whole world. You know? And so we were, like, why so depressing? This is just bad, Ayman. No more trends from you. We'll boycott you from writing any more trends because this trend is the worst trend you could ever come up with. And this is where the title comes in, the end of the status quo. Now you understand why we present it this way, what happened this way. And to be honest with you, I didn't know COVID or Corona or any of this stuff was coming, but we felt the world is entering a new decade. A change is happening. And what I'd like to do is walk you through what we think is going to happen. So let me see if I can do this correctly. Okay, so let me start, as I mentioned to you, I am Egyptian. So it's important to talk about Egypt as well as we start to focus on the end of the status quo, right? And in Egypt, in particular in Egypt, 4 out of 5 new jobs, right, are small business, are micro business, okay? That's an amazing statistic. So out of 5 people, 5 new jobs, 4 of them are in the micro and small business arena, okay? Which accounts for about 75% of the labor force, okay? 75% of the Egyptian labor force is in small and micro businesses, okay? So this is huge in terms of Egypt's labor force. So we need to really focus on what I call the Egyptian employment, the ecosystem of jobs created in Egypt and how we can support micro and small medium enterprises. Now, Egypt has an entrepreneurship program, the New Egypt Entrepreneurship Program, the EEP, which really targets MSMEs. I know the ministers are working very hard on this program here. And this creates a lot of what we call funding opportunities, new startups, accelerators, platforms. And I know in AUC, you have Flat 6, you have incubators, you have startups. So the trend in Egypt is very important to create more of them. Because at the bottom line, 4 out of 5 new jobs will come from small businesses and micro businesses, right? Egypt's ICT sector has significant growth, but a lot of obstacles, right? So, and I particularly focus on ICT because we believe Egypt can be the leader in the Middle East in terms of ICT. It has what I call the human power, the skills, the knowledge, the young Egyptian engineers, designers, developers, right? The workforce can really take ICT to the next level, especially in the Arab world. So this is what I call the Egyptian ecosystem. And I'm really excited about it, especially with we started a couple of years, we proposed to the Egyptian government the Youth Summit, right? And it was actually over dinner where we were talking to people and we told them, you need a youth summit, right? And they said, oh, Ayman, good idea, let's meet some ministers. And off we went with some ministers, and in the next year, we saw President Sisi announce the Youth Summit. Incredible speed, amazing speed, right? And that's what we need more of. And I'm now calling for not just the Youth Summit, I'm calling for a youth marketplace in which Egyptian youth come to the marketplace and sell their products and services, right? And then government officials, ministries, big businesses in Egypt go to the marketplace and buy Egyptian, buy local from SMEs. So you go, imagine a marketplace with all Egyptian youth, young men and women, sitting there in booths and selling their products and services to government ministries, big businesses in Egypt. That's what I want. And I've been asking Mr. Ahmed Osman, president of ICSB, to talk to the government officials saying, create a marketplace in Egypt, create a youth marketplace. Every year, tied to the Youth Summit, is a youth marketplace in which you give 10 million Egyptian pounds just directly for youth, for businesses and services, right? And then have this across the Middle East. So that's what I want for the Egyptian ecosystem. Let me continue, right? Breaking the new normal. Ahmed Osman, the president of ICSB, was very prophetic when he said that in Egypt and in the world, there's a new dawn coming. He wrote a very fascinating article called The New Dawn for Egypt, and that's going to be submitted and launched on June 27 as part of MSME Day, right? And if you look at this graph carefully here, what you can see happening here is that there's a lot of problems in different parts of the world in terms of enterprises and who's getting access to support based on COVID-19, right? And this revolution of sorts that's creating this is because people are trying to level the playing field, not just about the virus, but trying to survive the virus and getting the benefits and the help that they need here. This graph was graciously generated and created by the International Labor Organization here. And it shows the number of jobs in the sectors at risk from COVID-19 by region, by enterprise type, and a very important aspect, informal versus formal businesses here. Not all businesses are formal. Not all businesses are registered. In Egypt in particular, there's a lot of businesses that are informal. It's a cash economy, if you may. So we have to decide, we have to work together on deciding how to support them. And that's critical. So this graph, beautifully presented by the ILO, captures this. Now, let me go to the next slide. Right here. Where are we now? Okay, and this is a big question. So if I ask the audience, if we do a poll, right, and this is maybe over dinner, over coffee, over tea, right, and let's say there's 9 of us having dinner, okay, Dr. Ali, let's say 9 of us are having dinner, okay, or having coffee, right, and I ask the question from the 9 people in this dinner, and even here, I ask this question, I say, how many of you want to go back to how things were before COVID-19? How many of you want to go back to how things were? Business as usual, like before. Okay? And then I ask, how many of you want to not go back and change everything? Something totally new. And how many of you don't know where you stand? You're not sure where you stand. Here's what's going to happen, right? 1/3 or 3 of us in this dinner of table of 9 will automatically say, I want to go back. I want to go back before this COVID-19 happens. I had a good life. I went to work. I was making good money. I had my friends. I used to travel. I used to have a perfect life. I used to go to Hurghada. I used to go traveling. I used to make good money. This whole thing is a disaster. I don't like it at all. I want to go back. 1/3, that means 3 want to go back to the old ways, the old days. Then you got another third, another 3 people saying, I don't want to go back. I can't go back. It's finished. We need to create something new. No more going back. خلص, no back, ما فيش. Okay? And then there's 3 of us in the dinner table that will not say a word. They'll stay quiet. They don't have an answer. I call them the missing middle or the silent third, because those third are not sure what the answer is. They're really not sure. Do they go back or do they change? Okay? That's the fundamental question that we have to answer. When you hear people saying, oh, we're never going to go back, not the case, because there's 1/3 of the population wanting to go back to before. 1/3 of the population want to move forward, but 1/3 of the population is not sure. That's where the issue is, that not sure, the unknown. So what does that mean? That means we have to study what's that 1/3, what's the missing third. And I have to tell you, it's significant. So let me share with you some data and some research that just came out recently to help capture this issue here, and why 1/3 want to go back and 1/3 want to change, and 1/3 are not sure. Let me explain this to you in data now and statistics. Right here. What we know, and I call this the unluckiest generation of all time. The unluckiest generation of all time is the generation between 20 and 24 years old. The young kids. They have the worst time ever, okay? It's really bad for them, okay? Why? Because job losses, when Corona or COVID-19 hit the hardest, the 20 to 24-year-old. What's the population in Egypt of 20 to 24-year-olds and in the world, okay? This is really bad because this critical generation has been hit the hardest in terms of jobs in this period of time. This young generation are being educated, are looking for jobs. So that's why the ILO and many organizations are trying to support them, okay? Are trying to, oops, let me go back. Are trying to support them here. And then if you move along the graph, what it shows you here that it's not really bad for my generation, right? This generation here. Between the 40 to the 50, yes, we've been affected, but not as much as the young people or as the seniors. Now, I asked you the question before where I asked you, 1/3 want to go back. And you can clearly see which third want to go back. And then you can see clearly 1/3 that don't want to go back. So if you think about it, this third here, between 15 years old to 30 years old, don't want to go back. They're like, we can't go back. It's bad. Okay? And then you have the third here, except the 70 to 74 years old, between the 50 to the 70, they want to go back. Life was good. It was okay. It wasn't that bad. And then the missing, which is the missing middle, are between the 40 to the 50-year-old. This is where we are deciding, where do we stand on this? This becomes a major issue here, because the decision makers usually reside in this area right here. Who's being affected heavily is here. Those people have a responsibility for the younger generation. Let me show it to you in a different example, right here. This is the US full-time workforce by generation. So in the United States, this is the numbers that we're looking at here, okay? In beginning of December 2020, right, in January of 2020, the millennials, which is the young people between the ages of 1981 and 1996, eclipsed the Generation X in employment. That means there were more people hired, more people in the workforce that were millennials than Generation X, which is my generation, which is maybe your generation, Dr. Ali, right? So Kiran, Iman eclipsed us in job employment, okay? But and then the baby boomers are declining, right? And what we call the silent generation of the Zoomers are low. But what has happened because of COVID-19, because of this issue, the Generation X has eclipsed the millennials again. More millennials lost their jobs than Generation X. Okay? That's an issue here, because the growth should have continued with the millennials replacing Generation X for it. But more importantly, Generation X liked what we had before. The next slide shows you what this means from an economic growth by year. So if you look at it from a historical standpoint, what you can see happening here, that Generation X, we were in an upward trajectory when it comes to economic growth by year. We were doing well. Okay, every year was helpful for us, for Generation X and the baby boomers. They had the old pension plans, the great pension plans and the insurance, right? So they were okay. They have their houses, they have disposable income, they have their pensions. Life was good. Generation X, we were okay. We were moving better. The millennials, it's not going well for them. It's actually going downhill. It's getting worse and worse. Okay, and if you look carefully, basically at the growth in the first decade after entering the labor force, you could see that it's going down for them by the second decade. So if you're a Millennial X and I'm sitting in them in class and I'm teaching them, I know they're unlucky. I know they're not getting a good break. Life is not giving them a good break. Their generation is having a very hard time. Okay? And it's not getting any rosier here. It's not life is going to be good for them, because what's going to happen here is that their employment and earnings is not going to recover. Okay? So the millennials' earnings compared to Generation X, compared to the baby boomers, is not going to recover as fast. Okay? So we need to act now to make sure that we don't lose a whole generation of millennials. Okay? Because that's our future. We cannot rely only on 2 generations. We have to make sure that we do things to help the millennials. Okay? And that's the issue that ICSB, Mr. Ahmed Osman and Winslow Sargent, and many of the thought leaders at ICSB are working on. And that's why we partnered right away. I think Ahmed Osman flew to Rome with the ILO, and ICSB signed a partnership with the ILO on youth, because we were looking at these numbers and we're saying, from an education standpoint, from an outreach standpoint, from what we advocate, we need to focus on the millennials and the youth. That's why we did the Youth Academy in Cairo last year. That's why we asked AUC to host the youth, and we had over 100 or 120 students to join us, and a big delegation from AUC came. But 100, 120 students is not enough. We should talk about 1 million, 1.2 million people, youth, to be joining this. because the numbers are staggering when it comes to earnings, to employment, in terms of millennials. So in terms of wealth, and bottom line, at the end of the day, when we talk about wealth and what does that all mean here, it means that if you look carefully here, that we had in 2007 and 2008, when the financial crisis hit, everybody took basically a dive down. Things went very bad here, right? And basically for the different generations by age, we recovered. For the most part, we recovered. The younger people recover faster a little bit here, but they're still below the median in terms of wealth creation. So what does that mean? That means when you're looking at a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old young kid, or somebody that's saying, well, you're not going to have a lot of money at the end. You're not going to accumulate a lot of wealth. Okay? Why? It's because things are stagnant. We need to reformulate, change the way we look at the world. I take you back to this whole question of the 1/3. 1/3 want to go back. 1/3 don't want to go back. And 1/3 are in the middle. Okay? And you can look at the graphs exactly where this falls under. Okay? And there's responsibilities. There's civic responsibilities. There's generational responsibilities that we need to discuss here. So what do? This is what we, ICSB, I as a deputy chair in the Department of Management at GW, and my colleagues from around the world here, that's what we're calling for. We're calling for the end of the status quo, but creating a new world, and a world that is based on respect for human dignity, which demands respect for human freedom, right? And if we agree on this, so we don't have to see what we see in the news. We can agree that that allows for new opportunities. It's based on equity, empathy, right? Taking care of our climate, taking care of our people, taking care of our resources, okay? And it has to be in a circular system. What I mean is the following, right? And what we call at ICSB, we call it humane entrepreneurship, right? And it's basically, we can't just do things as usual, because it can harm the world. When you know of a company, when you know of an activity that only abuses its employees, abuses its resources, abuses it's available to it, it will harm everybody. We know those companies. We know those people, okay? There's nothing good about these harmful entities. So we have to eliminate them. We have to get rid of them. And then we have to also start working on what we call negative companies or negative humane entrepreneurship. And those companies are basically, maybe they're making a lot of money. That's fantastic. They're making, millions of dollars. They're making $10 million profit a year. Okay, that's great, but they're paying their staff very little. They're not taking care of their resources. They're not taking care of their community. We need to fix this. We need to tell them, you can still make a lot of money. You can make 5 million profit and take 5 million and invest it in your people, invest it in your staff, invest it in your community, build better hospitals, build better roads, partner with local community, invest in the youth, invest in daycares, invest in mother care, right? Use that money to help. And we can fix this. There needs to be interventions. And these interventions just don't come from the government. They come from society to fix those, what we call negative humane enterprises. And then there's moderate enterprises, which they do a good job. They actually do a good job, but they need to continue it as a system, not as just a one-time event. They need to do it so it's a continuous event. So let me give you an example. A company decides that this year they're gonna donate $1 million in educating the youth. Okay, that's perfect. That's a great initiative. What about next year? What about the following year? Is this a one-time event, or can you make this into a yearly event? Because that's what we call moderate. It's a one-time, one event only. And what we're really after is what we call ideal, which is this concept of that whatever they do, whatever the company does or the organization does, it is continuous. it continuously evolves, it continuously builds, right? So if we can increase more of the ideal and more of the moderate, humane enterprises and fix the negative and remove the harmful, we have 3/4 of the companies in the society doing a good job. And we can focus on the one and the remaining fourth that are harmful. So we say, we're coming after you. We know who you are, and you're not going to stay forever. We're going to remove you because you're harmful to society, right? And if we do this, then we can create the world again, right? And this is what I am excited about. You know, if leaders can understand the opportunities in differences and similarities and continue to work together, then the world can be exciting again, okay? And this is where I really like what AUC is doing, right? Because AUC is embedded in this concept of history and innovation and competition. That is what AUC is all about in Cairo, tying innovation, trying to bring the most competitive ideas to market, right? But also serving a cause, okay? Which is educating the young leaders in Egypt, the future leaders of Egypt, right? And that's their calling for over 100 years, right? So this is where I think AUC can play a bigger role. Your webinar series are absolutely fantastic. I've seen the thought leaders that you have brought in. They're amazing, okay? But we need to move forward together. So at the end, I leave you with this, what I call the human states or the human entrepreneurial states of the future ahead. So at dinner, at the end, when I ask that question, I know clearly what side I am in, right? I am on the side that I want to move everybody forward, especially the millennials, especially the younger generation. It is my responsibility as a professor, you know, as a deputy chair, as an executive director, it's why I am on earth, to make sure that I move everybody together. So I'm gonna stop here and give it back to you, Dr. Ali, for questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ayman. Please, if you have any questions, please send them through the chat box, and Kariman and her team will assemble the questions. In the meantime, I would like to sort of bring some point here, and I want to get your opinion about it. It's about the issue of inclusiveness. When I talk about small businesses, I mean, granted, I mean, all startups are small businesses, but not all small businesses are entrepreneurs, or from the perspective of a typical school of business entrepreneurship. Let me explain more. Most of the people in entrepreneurship, they will tell you entrepreneurship by necessity is not entrepreneurship. If I'm doing this because I cannot find a job, then this is not entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is that when I'm doing it because of I have an innovation, creativity, that kind of a thing, which I think is a very elitist way of looking at things. You're sort of depriving the many people who could be actually base of the pyramid from the right to be entrepreneurs and from the right to be called innovators, just because they don't fit your stringent form of entrepreneurship. Let me try to sort of explain it in a different, it's like a country, and you're trying to sort of strive for a medalist, Olympic medalist. You're going to be very aggressive in selection. So even if somebody is providing a mediocre potential or an average potential, you're going to kill him out. This is the other extreme. If a country is interested in promoting sports, as long as somebody is doing sports, he's doing laps, even at not so competitive speed, you will continue to support him. There are two different mindsets. One is inclusive. Now, the interesting part is that when you jump into the inclusive, eventually you have more numbers, eventually you win more medals. But for the short term, most countries would take the approach, because I've talked with entrepreneurs, with VLabs, for example, and people who are actually financing entrepreneurs. They're looking for the next swivel. They're looking for the next multi-million-dollar company. They're not looking for somebody who's going to do a decent job and barely float. So I just want to get your opinion about this, about the inclusiveness, about the democratizing of the startup motion.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you, and I agree with you, and it's a very good question here. The way I define the difference between small business and entrepreneurship, and then I'll answer you what I mean by entrepreneurship here, is that small businesses are a lifestyle business, okay? That means you run a small company or a small business and you're happy with what you have. You don't want to grow it anymore. I come from a family small business. Let me be very clear what I mean. My father started a company, it's a small business company, and it did extremely well. You know, he had many different outlets, showrooms, and stuff like that. And I asked him, he's almost 90 now, I asked him, I said, why didn't you go big? Why don't you not do only 5 or 6? Why don't you do 500 and 600 of them? And he goes, I didn't want to, Ayman. I was happy with what I had. I had 5 or 6, I was making good money, I was spending time with you and the family, and I was happy. I don't want to go 500 and 600. Those type of businesses are lifestyle businesses. They're happy with what they have. And there's nothing wrong with these family businesses or these small businesses here, because that's a decision they made. And even the minister of New Zealand or Ireland said, we don't have to force everyone to grow. They have the right to stay small as they like, but we have a responsibility to support them, okay? And in France, in particular, they made all these laws and regulations to support small businesses up to 50 employees, okay? But what happened now, if a small business wants to go to 51 employees, they get so much paperwork, so much regulation from the French government that they say, oh, it's too much, I'm not doing it. So the French government now is changing its laws to help promote small businesses to grow. So let me be very clear. Not all small businesses have to be entrepreneurial. It's a lifestyle decision. But the government and everybody has to support small businesses because they are the fabric of society. That's what they hire, make employment happen. In terms of your question about inclusive, I absolutely agree with you. Regardless if it's by necessity or not, if you go to the market to create something, to sell something, to build something, you are an entrepreneur. Necessity or by opportunity, my definition, you are an entrepreneur. You cannot tell this young woman or mother in Africa that walks for 2 miles to sell fruits in the market that she's not an entrepreneur, okay? Who are we to judge? And it's not the academic term. Scott Shane wrote a book about this, and he said that there is, what people ignore is what they call the necessary entrepreneurs, or entrepreneurship by necessity. And he goes, a lot of the policies, government policies, procedures, support, need to support necessary entrepreneurship. That's, the bottom of the pyramid is critical here. And that's where microfinance comes in, that's where all these interventions come in. So I agree with you, inclusive entrepreneurship, and small business are all distinct topics, but they are all critically important. Finally, what I like to say about all of this here is the venture capitalists that are looking for the next big, Amazon or Facebook, that's their domain. But there's another domain here, which is a whole different marketplace. We can have an ecosystem where you have both. We do not need to focus only on one. We can focus on many here, and that's really critical. I was in a meeting at the IFC maybe a couple of years ago, and the IFC was exploring and investing in gazelles, which means high growth companies, okay? And somebody asked them in this meeting, said, let me get this straight. Are you telling me that the International Finance Corporation is gonna bet taxpayers' money on a company that may or may not grow? That's not your job, okay? That's the job of venture capitalists. So the IFC changed their mind and said, okay, we're not doing this, right? But there's an ecosystem for this. Egypt has a very robust ecosystem for VCs, and we should let them do this, but we should also support small businesses in Egypt.
Thank you. Kariman, do you have any questions from the audience?
Thank you so much, Ayman. That was very insightful. We have a question. Many developing countries are suffering from the missing middle problem. We would like to hear your views about that phenomenon. Generally speaking, what are the obstacles that stand against developing a strong middle sector?
Yeah, that's an excellent question here. And on June 25, we're going to be celebrating MSME Day or Small Business Day at the UN. Here's the problem here, and seriously, it's the problem. What's going to happen now in the next 12 months, right, is all the global leaders and all the decision makers are going to come together in these big conferences, right, and they're going to sit at the table and renegotiate, right, the world trade system, right? So everybody's going to come and sit on the table and they're going to start negotiating a new trade system, right, a new world order between economies, between businesses here. And as my colleague Chantaline from the United Nations said, and I absolutely give her credit, and I tell her that this is an excellent idea here. You know who's going to be missing at the table? You know who's not going to be sitting at the table? Small businesses. Small businesses will not be invited to the table. Big businesses are going to be at the table. Government officials are going to be at the table, right? But the small businesses are not going to be at the table. They will not have a voice. That's the problem. That's the problem that ICSB sees. And that's what we're calling on. We're calling on that every time you have a business meeting, a world business meeting, a global business meeting, you need to have a representative of small business sitting at the table, because we are the voice of small business. We are the voice of those 1/3 missing in all these developing countries. And when you negotiate the multi-trillion-dollar deal, I'll raise my hand and say, okay, that's great, fantastic. How much of it is for small business? How much of this world trade is coming to small business? How much of it in procurement is going to come to small businesses or these necessity entrepreneurs? We need to negotiate now to be at the table. We need to be at the table. And I know in Egypt, you are creating what you call the SME Council or the sector or the Small Business Administration. ICSB is calling that every country in the world creates a Small Business Administration, an SBA. And the minister of the Small Business Administration reports directly to the president, not to another minister, directly to the president. Why? That's how you get the voice of small business heard. When you're meeting with the president, you say, who's talking about small business? So-and-so is talking about small business. Tell me what's happening. No finance? Get the banks to get finance. No education for the youth? Let's create training programs. And better, let's do it. That's what happens in the United States. The SBA administrator reports directly to the president. That's how they made it. And that's what ICSB is calling for all countries, to have small business at the table in decision-making, not through some other ministry, not through some other conduit, directly to the leadership to report. And especially when it comes to trade, which is coming soon. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much, Ayman. Another question. Egypt suffers from several social problems, and there are now several calls to resort to business solutions to approach such problems. Usually these types of projects do not have a strong business case and needs initial investment and initial boost. However, most incubators and conventional banking system are looking for quick wins with high returns. What are the alternative solutions for these businesses to start and survive? Is it the responsibility of the government to support those businesses, or the philanthropic institutions should bear the burden of this investment? Or do you think the business mindset needs to change the business?
Okay, I think I got the question here. So I mentioned it earlier here, and maybe I'll ask Dr. Ali to take it under his wing and to do it. Is where ICSB is calling, and we're calling it to Egypt, is what we call the youth marketplace. Okay, and maybe AUC can take the lead on this, in which they call on a youth leadership summit and in AUC. And the idea is very simple, right? You bring these problems that are being presented in Egypt, and you create a marketplace, because the role of entrepreneurs is to always see problems and turn them into opportunities. So let's say there's a problem, say, okay, let's take this into an opportunity. And then the youth, the young generation, the millennials, come to the marketplace and say, we have solutions. But coming to the marketplace is not just young people talking about solutions. You bring the government, and you bring the public sector, and you bring the private sector, and let them buy, let them purchase the solutions from the marketplace, from the youth. Let them buy it directly, made in Egypt, for Egypt, in the youth marketplace. Start small. It doesn't have to be a lot of money. Start with 1 or 2 or 3 pilot projects, right? But have this as a national solution, the youth marketplace, made by Egypt for Egyptians, and see what happens. Trust me, you'll get a lot of engagement, because if big business starts to see the government moving, big business says, oh, wait a minute, leadership of the government is coming to support the youth in the marketplace. They're going to buy 2 million or 3 million pounds of products. We better go buy 2 or 3 million pounds of products as well, and services. Why? Because it's important. That's signaling that we are in a partnership agreement. This is what I think the role of universities in Egypt should do. They should be the conduit, the middle people, the middle person, to bring everything together. Everybody recognizes and respects universities. That's the role of universities, what I call the enterprising university. I hope that answers the question.
Kariman? We might have lost her.
I think so. I think she's
one of the
frozen.
audiences asked the demands.
Okay. Okay, go ahead, Kariman.
Can you hear me?
Yes, but can you repeat the question again?
Can you hear me?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't get the question.
Okay, sorry. One of the audience is asking. No? Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't hear the question, but I'm going to jump on the chat now. It says the education sector in Egypt needs a lot of engagement of the entrepreneurship and small business philosophy.
This exists in Egypt, but let me actually change this. Sorry? Okay.
Okay, so I read the question here about the engagement of the entrepreneurship and small business philosophy. What ICSB should present in this sector here? You know, I think AUC does a great job of what I call experiential learning, which is basically taking theory into practice. And that's very important, because it cannot just be based on a textbook in which you tell the student how to learn how to do entrepreneurship based on a textbook here. I think at least what I see happening here, at least in George Washington University and other universities here, is these courses need to evolve into a different type of course. So let me give you an example. At GW now, in some of the courses we teach here, is we do 2 or 3 different webinars like this, okay? And we say to them, okay, we're gonna talk a little bit about the basics of entrepreneurship education. And then we do basically then a 3-day, 4-day, very intensive executive program on campus, but it's not on campus. What we do is we go visit the World Bank, we go visit the ISC, we go visit, you know, the US Congress, we go visit partner organizations, and we work with those organizations on project-based education. So we do a project with the World Bank, we do a project with the IMF, and the students are leading this. And then at the end of this, what we call this DC campus experience, when which students are working with the companies here, right? Then at the end of the semester, we do 2 or 3 different meetings online or on campus in which those students, right, are presenting their results. What we've noticed is that once they present the results and they're graduating, these companies come and hire our students. saying, oh, listen, we want to continue this project. Come work with us. Okay? That's what I call the future of education. It's a hybrid between on-campus, online, tied to clients or tied to the ecosystem, right? And especially in the area of entrepreneurship, education, and leadership. I think this is where AUC can play a critical role, because AUC has, and what I understand, has a very intensive and very advanced executive programs, right? For training executives, planning with executives. Bring the students into this. Let the students work with the executives in the companies for education purposes. I think that'll be a great win-win for everybody.
Thank you, Ayman. A fresh graduate is asking you, what's your advice to him or her? Should they invest in graduate studies, further graduate studies, or should they go on and start their own business and develop their own selves in different manners?
That's a great question, and I get this question a lot. And I'm going to answer the question with a question. Okay, so are you ready? Okay, so I'm going to answer the question with a question. Why not both? Why not both? Why don't you start the business and go to school at the same time? And what's the worst that can happen, right? The business fails, you get a degree, right? The business succeeds, you get a degree, okay? While you're building the business, you can turn the business and have people in the program support you build the business, because you're gonna meet new people, you're gonna meet new professors, you're gonna meet new networks. Why sit at home alone, try to build a business while you have all this network available for you and that you can use? Investing in yourself is always a good thing. It's always a good decision. If you want to invest in education for yourself, that's good. If you want to invest in exercise, that's good. If you want to invest in buying books to read, that's a good thing. Always invest in yourself. That's the critical aspect. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you. Actually, we have a question that says, respect for human dignity demands respect for human freedom. The question is, do you trust this exists in Egypt? But let me change this a bit, given what's going on in all over the globe. Do you think that this exists in most countries of the world?
Well, I think what we see in the United States, and we see what's happening here, and I call this, there's a revolution for cohesion here. We're having these conversations in the United States. We're having these conversations all around the world here, right? These are big problems. These are big challenges for everybody here. And I hope that we all collectively can come together to find the solution together here. You know, nothing is perfect, and things are always need to be improved here. But where we stand is that we, or me personally, I stand for human dignity and human respect have to go hand in hand here. So with that, I want to make sure that you have to take the responsibility as well to start every day by doing so, to make sure that you do your best every day. Okay, and slowly the whole movement starts here. You know, there's an expression I use in my classroom here. I call it the butterfly effect. And it comes from a scientist here, in which he wrote a very seminal paper. He said, a butterfly in Africa will flap its wings and a tornado will hit the United States, because a small butterfly effect can change the world. And what we need to see here is that we need to change the world to a better place, right? And that's the whole concept of humane entrepreneurship. Let us remove the harmful entities. Let us fix the negative. Let us increase what the middle is, but let's have more ideal humane entrepreneurship. I hope that answers the question and the point, but point well taken.
Thank you, Ayman. Thank you so much. And we have lots of thank yous to you. Thank you for describing those who sell stuff, simple people who sell stuff as entrepreneurs. And thank you for an insightful presentation. We are very proud of him and all his achievements indeed. Thank you so much, Ayman.
Oh, I want to thank everybody here. I'm telling you, my heart is always in Egypt. I always smile when I go to Egypt and I talk to the young people when I lecture in their classrooms. They have so much passion, so much creativity, so much enthusiasm. I just laugh and I'm always smiling. And people always say, Ayman, why are you always smiling? I'm like, don't you see these young kids here? They're just all troublemakers, but they're just fantastic. So I just want to I wish I could hug you all, but I want to wish you all the best and I hope to see you all again.
Ayman, thank you again. It's really a pleasure. And I personally enjoyed the presentation and the discussion, such as the rest of the audience. Thank you again. And of course, I thank Amal Muafio for the introduction and the suggestion.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Ali. I want to thank again the Gerhard Center, Amal, and you, and Kariman, and Iman, and everybody for hosting. And also want to thank all the attendees here. It's been fantastic. I really enjoyed it. I wish you the best, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Inshallah. Thank you. Tomorrow we're going to have Jeffrey Sachs, and he's going to talk about the SDGs and the aftermath of the COVID-19. I mean, everybody's talking about the SDGs, the Egypt 2030. Should they be fine-tuned or should be totally revamped? Now, I guess Jeffrey Sachs probably is the best person to address this question. We're going to have him tomorrow at 3 o'clock, so stay tuned and see you soon. Thank you, Ayman. Thank you, Kariman and Iman and team. Pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Take care now. Stay safe. Huh? Bye-bye.